tutorial's Trailblaze Continuance of version 2.5, part 2 of the finest duel under the Pristine Blue is very suspicious, for a variety of reasons, and I really liked it a lot. But when the mission was over, I had to stop and think about it for a bit, and that made me go, why did I, you say? Well, I made this video precisely to tell you why. However, in order for me to properly convey what I mean, we're gonna have to first understand the context behind the topics at hand, which involves a discussion of what we learned during patch 2.5's Trailblaze mission, along with a brief history of the Xianzhou Alliance. The story of finest duel under the Pristine Blue centers around Hulei, the Brood Lord of the Borson's Eclipse Pack, and Feixiao, the Merlin's Claw of the Xianzhou Yaoqing. Oh, also, there is Yunli Mark 7th and Yanqing, but they're not too relevant for what we care about. Now, one thing we should note about Feixiao is that she is not really Feixiao, and that actually matters because she isn't a native of the Xianzhou. Her real name is Saran, a Foxian who in her childhood was enslaved by the Borson on the planet of Kolor. The Borson themselves are a species quote-unquote blessed by the Aeon Yaocha, marking them as denizens of the abundance. Due to the long history of conflict that the Xianzhou Alliance and their Aeon Lan have with the Abundance, their hunt of Yaocha's abominations eventually led them to a conflict with the Borson, and it was during that conflict that General Yueyu found and saved Saran, taking the young lady back with her to the Yaoqing. There, Saran was given the name Feixiao, which is known as today. This means that Feixiao is basically an alias, much like how Guinevere is called Gwynethan. Both are cultural nicknames rather than being their true identities. Anyway, many things that are too long for me to include happened between Saran joining the Alliance and the present day, so as a super summary of what is relevant to us, the Brood Lord of the Borson's Eclipse Pack, Hulei, is subdued in battle by the Luofu's sword champion Jingliu, but Hulei could not be killed no matter what, resulting in his imprisonment by the Alliance. Meanwhile, Saran became General Yueyu's disciple and climbed through the ranks of the Yaoqing's Verdant Knights by virtue of her valor and heroic deeds. When Yueyu was ultimately slain in battle, Saran succeeded her as the Xianzhou Yaoqing's Arbiter General, becoming known as the Merlin's Claw, Feixiao. Not too far off on the Luofu, another series of extremely important historical events were taking place. Long story short, a powerful emanator of the Abundance known as Shuhu initiated an upheaval where it rallied a great army of the denizens of the Abundance to attack the Xianzhou. On the Luofu, Shuhu's forces were intercepted by Jingliu along with Dan Heng's predecessor, the then High Elder of the Luofu Vidyadhara, Dan Feng. At the time, Dan Feng and Jingliu were two members of the High Cloud Quintet. The other three were Jing Yuan, Bai Heng, and Yingxing, now known as Blade. And keep in mind that just like with Saran and Guinevere, Yingxing was just an alias that Blade used, it's not his real name. During the battle, Jingliu and Dan Heng were overpowered by Shuhu's sanguinary abyss, until Bai Heng stepped in and saved them along with countless other lives. Right after, Bai Heng dove straight back into the enemy lines where she detonated a sun of absolute darkness that sent her and all the enemies around her straight to Jesus. Dan Feng was distraught by what had happened. Refusing to accept the manner of Bai Heng's death, he gathered what little blood and hair remained of her, taking it to the Dragon Palace at the foot of the Ambrosial Arbor. With Blade's assistance, Dan Feng attempted to use the flesh of Shuhu to tamper with the transmutation arcanum used for High Elder succession to resurrect Bai Heng. That on its own was a great sin on the Luofu, but to make matters worse, the process failed and created an abhorrent draconic abomination which wrought great destruction until it was defeated by Jingliu and suppressed as Bailu, though the ordeal left the former Marastruck. Enraged by the severity of his transgressions, the Vidyadhara preceptors and the Ten Lords Commission captured Dan Feng, subjugating him to torture, followed by a forced reincarnation. Following the sedition of Imbibitor Lune, the preceptors, who were left with a powerless child dragon lady, became pressured into conceding their positions of power. Hoping that restoring the High Elder would somehow allow the Vidyadhara to resume their duties as guardians of the Ambrosial Arbor, the Cauldron Master of the Luofu's Alchemy Commission, Danju, who was a Vidyadhara herself, attempted to perform certain healing arts on the newly reborn Dan Heng, completely restoring his memories of the past life along with his power. However, before finishing the process, Danju was found by Jing Yuan. The general showed both of them mercy, keeping Danju's actions a secret and banishing her from the Luofu on the Xianzhou Ming on account of other crimes. After Danju left with her disciple Ling Sha, Jing Yuan negotiated a lighter sentence for Dan Heng involving his permanent exile from the Luofu. Without their High Elder, the Luofu Vidyadhara lost their standing amongst the Alliance, and as time passed, their prestige declined and their numbers dwindled. Thus, the once proud dragon race fell into despair, and desperation sowed the seeds of treachery in the hearts of some of their ranks. Fearing the possibility of their extinction, a few high-ranking members secretly conspired with the Lord Ravager Fentilia, helping her achieve her goals from behind the shadows. Fentilia's plan consisted of two parts. The first involved the Disciples of Sanctus Medicus, an old radical group that worshipped the Abundance Emanator Shu Hu. The Lord Ravager took on Ting Yun's form as a disguise and used the Disciples as a distraction to gain access to the Ambrosial Arbor, where she was intercepted by the Trailblazer, Jing Yuan, Wei Tiang, and Dan Heng, now back as Imbibitor Lune. Oh, and March 7th also tagged along, I guess. Fast forward to part 1 of the finest duel under the Pristine Blue, the Trailblaze Continuance is kickstarted by the return of Danju's disciple Ling Sha from the Zhu Ming to take on the role of the new Cauldron Master on the Luofu under the preview of General Jing Yuan. For the second part of her plan, Fentilia took the form of a great prophet known as comics. Of a great prophet known as mangas. Yeah, she's a bit of a weeb. And then tricked the Borsen into infiltrating the Luofu and freeing the Eclipse Pact's broodlord Hule under the promise that this would usher in the revival of their former glory. All of this coincided with the Xianzhou's war dance, and due to the tournament's importance, along with other details that we don't need to get into, General Huayan of the Xianzhou Zhuming and General Feixiao of the Yaoqing were invited. However, Saran had other motivations for visiting the Luofu, namely to ask Jing Yuan for permission to transport Hule into the Yaoqing, where he could be punished for all the monstrous crimes he committed against the Foxians, and for those purposes she brought with her her counselor Zhao Chou and her shadow Moza. And that brings us to the events of version 2.5. After Hule is freed from the shackling prison, the Borsen take Zhao Chou hostage to use him for the sake of gaining intel on Feixiao. Knowing his predicament, Zhao Chou decides to make the best of the situation by offering to divulge Feixiao's past in exchange for Hule telling him the secrets behind his immortality in return. Hule picks up on Zhao Chou's intentions, but his amusement gets the better of him and he agrees to the conditions. This is when Zhao Chou reveals that Feixiao was once a Foxian war slave with Borsen blood in her veins. Due to this lineage, she was afflicted with a curse known as Moon Rage. To the Borsen, the Moon Rage curse is a blessing granted to them by the Aeon of Abundance, Yaocha, allowing them to shapeshift into greater, more powerful forms. This shapeshifting is accompanied by intense hyperplasia of the bone and muscle structure, such as a protruded snout and jawline and the twisting of the feet, with the process being described across several instances in the game as feeling like being torn from the inside out. Nonetheless, the Moon Rage's damaging deformation process is simultaneously completely healed by the Borsen's rapid regenerative capabilities, which are the greatest amongst all long-life species. And that's precisely where the problem lies. To anyone who isn't a pure-blood Borsen, the Moon Rage curse isn't a blessing, but rather, well, it's a curse. That guarantees death, which definitely didn't bode well for little Saran who was afflicted with it. You see, although the Borsen and the Foxians share a common ancestor, the two species diverged from each other long ago, becoming quite different. Today, the Foxians of the Yaoqing remain the closest to the Borsen genetically, presumably because most of them are descendants of war slaves. Saran, being mostly a Foxian, lacked the immense regenerative capabilities required to withstand the Moon Rage inherited from her Borsen side. Therefore, the curse caused her immense pain, and if she was to ever succumb to it completely, it would certainly bring about her end. Hence why she recruited Dr. Zhao Chou to find a way to cure this ailment. As for the secret behind Hule's immortality, in ancient legends it is said that the Borsen's ancestor, Duran, was dissatisfied with his limited lifespan and power. He yearned to dominate the skies and become the master of all the stars. So Duran slaughtered countless Foxians and Borsen, then poured them into a divine spring bestowed by the Aeon Yaocha, and through a form of genetic sorcery, the waters of the spring gave birth to a miracle, a lunar embryo. Look, I'm gonna be frank with you, that lunar embryo is what piqued my interest enough to make this video, and there's an excellent reason behind that. Keep it in mind, I'll explain it shortly. After the ritual proved successful, Duran ascended the birthing bed of his desires, the moon, where he obtained what he sought, a heart in the shape of a deep red full moon. Thus did Duran cut open his chest, rip his heart out, and replace it with this crimson moon. From that point onwards, every succeeding Borisan warlord would cut open their predecessor's chest and devour their divine heart, making the power of the Crimson Moon their own, with the most recent of those warlords being Hulei himself. It might seem weird, almost stupid, that Hulei would reveal the source of his power and immortality to one of his enemy's closest companions, especially when the Borisan were at no liberty to move freely on the Luofu due to being actively tracked and hunted by Saran and the Cloud Knights. Faced with such odds, one should seek every advantage possible. However, looking at the bigger picture, you will realize that his choice makes sense, because Hulei never intended to win to begin with. You see, the Borisan who freed Hulei from the shackling prison were driven by a prophecy given to them from Mangas, but Hulei was no fool. He immediately knew that this prophetess called Mangas, or I should say Fantilia, manipulated the Borisan who had become too desperate to recognize her deception. Followed by a group of Borisan barely holding onto false hope while surrounded on all sides by an enemy that significantly outnumbers them, the method through which he would achieve his victory had to be unconventional. And indeed, there was a method to his madness. What Zhao Chou had told Hulei about Saran piqued his interest. A Foxian with Borisan blood in her, who not only managed to survive the Moonrage curse for all these years, but also ascended from a lowly slave to one of the Xianzhou's legendary arbiter generals. Surely something could be done with that. So, as Saran had predicted, Hulei invaded the Sky Splitter intending to take everyone on it hostage, while using the ship as a vessel that would beckon the revival of his race. Yet, there was no audience on the ship for him to take advantage of, as everyone on it was preemptively replaced, with Cloud Knights ready to fight and recapture the Borisan warlord. Yeah, the Cloud Knights were no match for him and were slaughtered, but that's fine, since their sacrifices bought enough time for Yunli, Yanqing, and Mar 7th to arrive, who were also no match for him and almost got slaughtered, but that's fine since the trio bought enough time for Zhao Chou's poison to kick in and weaken Hulei. You see, before heading into battle, it is Borisan tradition to drink wine in the form of the blood from their prisoners or Foxian slaves. Zhao Chou was already aware of this and drank one of the most lethal poisons in the world, tumble dust, banking on the fact that Hulei would drink his blood before setting off to fight Saran. Zhao Chou's sacrifice paid dividends. If their enemy could never be physically matched, then the only way to defeat him would have to be by destroying his body from the inside, and the significantly weaker, slower, and less focused Hulei became easier for Yanqing, Mar 7th, and Yunli to handle. And that's where Yanqing earns his crown as Yan King, delivering an epic attack mirroring the one Jingliu used to subdue Hulei before. Yeah, even all that was not enough, and Yan King almost loses his head before Saran clutches by parrying Hulei's strike. Which is exactly what Hulei wanted. Remember that Hulei knew the odds were stacked against him from the very beginning, and that victory would have to be unconventional. So just like how Saran planned to leave him no way open for escape outside of the Sky Splitter, he planned to stir up as much noise on the Sky Splitter to bring the Merlin's Claw right in front of him. Seeing her Borisan blood, he already had a path prepared for her. Hulei then rips off his Crimson Moon heart and lifts it into the sky, where it would drive all Foxians into madness, and in their fear they would crave slaughter without end. With no choice left, Saran leaves the rest to march Yunli and Yanqing, then devours the Crimson Moon. Having consumed his heart, Hulei reveals to Saran his true objective. With no way out, he had found a path to victory through the Foxian general. By passing the Crimson Moon down to her, Hulei sought to destroy Saran's identity and consciousness, becoming Feixiao, after which he would walk the world as the Merlin's Claw. But Saran was not going to go out without a fight, and Hulei's plan, although it lasted longer than Concord, still failed. With the help of March 7th, Yunli, and Yanqing from the outside, the four heroes finally defeated Hulei for good. Alright, now that we know the full context, let me tell you what I found super interesting about this mission and why it made me go, As most of you already know, across all of their games, the writers of Hoyoverse tend to utilize extremely similar themes and concepts while crafting the lore, stories, and world building of their IPs. The motivations behind why they do this can vary depending on the situation. For instance, one reason could be that the writers intentionally borrow inspiration from similar sources for each game. Alternatively, they can sometimes try to foreshadow the events of one game in another, or the themes/concepts in question are really good and just simply fit in various situations, making them convenient to apply. With that being said, it is important to note that even if two or more of Hoyoverse's games share similar themes and world-building elements, by no means does this entail the existence of a significant connection between those games. Granted, it does appear that Hoyoverse are moving in that direction where their games will converge at some point. Regardless of all of that, I do strongly believe that by understanding these reoccurring plot devices and concepts, we can ascertain general narrative trends that the writers like to apply in each story and use them to try and predict possible outcomes in their other games. To easily demonstrate what I mean, all I have to do is point you towards the world of Penacony. For those of you who have played through it, or if you've watched the video I made about it, then you are probably well aware of how ridiculously similar the world building and structure of Penacony are to that of Teyvat in Genshin Impact on almost every mythological and foundational level imaginable. These striking resemblances exist for a few reasons, one of which is that both Penacony and Teyvat are heavily inspired by a short movie called The Angel's Egg, hence why analyzing the story of Penacony can directly teach us about the concepts that are relevant in Genshin. And also in their other games as well. Zenless Zone Zero is looking mighty suspicious if you ask me. However, I am prepared to argue that Penacony is not the only world mirroring Teyvat thematically. Rather, I think that every single world in Honkai Star Rail is either foreshadowing or teaching us different aspects of Genshin's lore. Yes, including Herta's space station. It's just that Penacony happens to be the world where the connections are the most blatant both visually and thematically, while in other worlds, they are more cleverly hidden or placed in the background. And by the way, this whole Star Rail Genshin correlation topic is one that I began to notice all the way back when Dan Heng split the sea on the Luofu in version 1.2. And I've wanted to talk about the Xianzhou for a very long time, especially after Penacony came out, but unfortunately, time is my worst enemy. Still, given all that we have learned in version 2.5, I am now actually glad that I delayed this topic for so long. So, let's talk about it! Also, if you are new, and for this specific video I am assuming many of you are going to be new, I will not recap the Angel's Egg here because I've already covered it extensively on this channel, so if I keep doing that, it will become extremely annoying for regular viewers, as you can probably imagine. Therefore, if you are interested in how it inspires the story of Genshin, feel free to check out one of the many videos I made about it, or if you are interested in how it inspires the story of Dark Souls, then I highly recommend you check out Vati's video. It's literally better than anything I could ever make. The story of the Angel's Egg follows two nameless characters, a soldier and a girl on a lonely island shaped like the overturned hull of a ship. This imagery directly references the biblical story of Noah's Ark, and the nameless boy tells the girl his own variation of the story, where the birds that Noah sent never return, leaving the people stranded in the ocean. This fits really well with the Xianzhou Alliance, which is a fleet of 6, originally 9, enormous ships, each a world of its own. As for Genshin Impact, well, Before Sun and Moon from the Byakuyakoku collection references Noah's Ark, in addition to the fact that the name of the continent where the story takes place, Teyvat, is derived from the Hebrew word for ark. Alright, knowing that both the Luofu and Teyvat are arcs, at least metaphorically, let's discuss what can be found on these arcs. While traveling together, the boy and the girl reach a cave containing the corpse of a deceased Leviathan, and right next to it is a pillar upon which is inscribed the image of a giant tree. This is when the boy tells the nameless girl about a dream he had where he saw a titanic tree extending to the heavens, on top of which slept an angelic dreaming bird. On Teyvat, that tree is clearly the leyline tree Irminsul, while the ambrosial arbor is the plague mark of abundance bestowed upon the Luofu by Yaocha in the form of a tree. And what do you find at the foot of the ambrosial arbor? A dragon palace with lots of dragon eggs and even a few dragons swimming in the background. Look at them. I should probably also mention that the Leviathan next to the tree pillar is not unique. Later in the movie, we get to see countless skeletons and fossils of dead Leviathans and sea monsters. In the Xianzhou, these Leviathans are the Vidyadhara, a race of Chinese-style dragons that originate from an oceanic planet. And more importantly, they are scions of the Aeon Long, who seems to be some kind of Chinese space Leviathan. But to be fair, does Irminsul have any important eggs on top of it or around it? No, it doesn't. Nonetheless, remember that the primordial one is said to have hatched from an egg created by Kronos and Ananke, being born with wings and a crown. That's already a lot of angelic symbolism. As for the Leviathan corpses, the ones who came before the primordial one were ancient dragons. Also, Neuvillette exists, and he is actually a Leviathan. Yeah, I have nothing to add here. Moving on to version 2.5, as Hule mentions, Duran created the lunar embryo by slaughtering Phoxians and Borisen, then pouring them into Yaocha's bathwater, obtaining the heart he had desired in the shape of a crimson moon. This idea of fusing a Crimson Moon heart to gain tremendous power is very similar to what we see with Peruere and the Crimson Moon dynasty. Not because their hearts are Crimson Moons, as far as we know that's not the case, but due to their ability to manipulate Bloodfire, which is directly tied to Genshin's Crimson Moon. That's without mentioning that the royalties of the Crimson Moon dynasty are heavily implied to have drank wine in the form of abyssal blood, granting them curses and power alike. Everything becomes even more suspicious when you add on the fact that before Feixiao, the last holder of the Crimson Moon heart was Hule, who led the eclipse pack, and although a Crimson Moon is a lunar eclipse, the one depicted on Hule's clothes is a solar eclipse, like the symbol of the Conrian Eclipse dynasty. Even Saran's spirit, Flying Aureus, which used to devour the Crimson Moon, is classified as an ecliptic beast officially in the game. I honestly find this whole idea of a lunar embryo to be both quite suspicious and interesting. An embryo is one of the earliest stages of multicellular life, forming not too long after a zygote is established. It's especially interesting when you consider that Sunday turned Dominicus into an embryo of philosophy in his attempt to become the quote-unquote sun. And he did this in the Grand Theater, which on Penacony is metaphorically the moon. We know this thanks to Mikhail's moon-gazing spot. If you want even more evidence, take a look at the two symbols found on either end of the Penacony Grand Theater. One resembles Paimon's tiara, and Paimon is all but confirmed to be some kind of lunar goddess, while the other is the exact same symbol found on Mona's attire. What's funny is that Mona's name literally means moon in Old English. By the way, Mona is a really cool character. I talk about her in this video right here. She's my third favorite character in Genshin. I like her a lot. Anyway, remember that Duran is said to have ascended to the moon to obtain his heart after creating the lunar embryo. Furthermore, Sunday's embryo of philosophy essentially takes on the structure of an eggshell that you have to crack, and the one inside it is Sunday himself, who is an angel. So you've got an angel inside an egg, like the angel's egg. As you can see, Hoyoverse's writers really like this movie, that's why I put so much emphasis on it. Once again, I must reiterate that my main goal in this video was to highlight some of the fundamental reoccurring themes and concepts that I have noticed in the Xianzhou Lawfu, since talking about them can help us understand the structure of the greater Hoyoverse at large. I am mainly pointing out these ideas so that people start to think about them more, and I guarantee you that I forgot or missed many other parallels between the Lawfu and Tevat. If you know any, then feel free to share them down in the comments. Ultimately though, these stories are all different, even if they share certain themes, but it is still good to be aware of these thematic parallels, because once you know the patterns, you can keep an eye on for such things in the future, and who knows, you might even catch a big one. For example, a minor but still pretty cool detail I noticed. You know how there is this whole thing with some archons like Baal, Beelzebul, and Boer all having shades, like how Scaramouche is Boer's shadow? Well, General Feixiao keeps Moza as her shadow. And he's not just her shadow in terms of character, but also in his color palette and artistic depictions. And he works really well with her too, it's a small thing. Now for a potentially really big parallel in the future, and I hope I am right on this one in particular. Earlier in the video, I said that every world in Star Rail teaches us about different aspects of Tevat. Interestingly, the next stop on the journey of the Nameless of the Astral Express is the Greek-inspired eternal land of Amphorias. And do you know upon what the first civilization of Tevat is inspired? Okay, this was a really weird video to make. Funny enough, I started off with a Lingsha theory since I really wanted to talk about Lingsha. Why did I want to talk about her? Well, see, the Vidyadhara remind me a lot of Seelis, but that's a topic for a whole other time. Perhaps I might revisit it at the end of patch 5.2 or 5.3 in Genshin. At any rate, as always, huge thanks to everyone who generously supports the channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. here's a fun fact for you, since you made it here. Did you know that the average human body has about as many bacterial cells as it does human cells? Don't worry though, these bacterial cells are extremely tiny and only make up around 2 to 3% of your biomass, so you are still around 97% you. So, as I was saying, thank you all for watching, thanks for everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.